The Trump tax cuts were known and projected to absolutely explode the deficits. Now, I covered a story not too long ago, maybe like a couple days ago, a week ago, I can't recall exactly, but it was about how the talking point of, oh, we're going to cut taxes, but the GDP will rise and that will cover the loss in tax revenue, exponentially, 2, 3, 4 times over. And this was literally a talking point written by the Koch brothers, given to people like Ted Cruz and others. That's not a conspiracy. That's an actual thing. You can look that up. That was an actual story. Now, obviously, the tax cuts are they're fucking terrible, and it doesn't make any sense. And again, I just have to ask, how on earth can the party who's supposedly the deficit hawks be the party to also pass these tax cuts? Because what do these tax cuts do? You're talking about, okay, you take the government and you keep their spending the same in this tax bill. And the tax bill changes nothing of spending, right? So it doesn't bring down the spending to match the revenue loss. So what you're doing is you keep the spending the same, but you bring the revenue down. So how on earth does that not result in exploding deficits? And you're supposed to be the deficits and the debt hawks, but you guys are the one running up both the debt and the deficit. So you're talking about, again, in George W. Bush's final year of his presidency, $1.2 trillion deficit. That is a ginormous deficit. Barack Obama, in his final year in office, brought it down to $400 billion. So he literally brought it down to 1/3 of what his predecessor's final year deficit was, which is very good. That's a huge, massive improvement. Now, here's what this story says. It says White House budget projects $1 trillion deficit in 2019. This is pretty crazy. It says the White House's mid-year budget projections see federal deficits surpassing $1 trillion in 2019. In an annual budget review, the White House's Office of Management and Budget estimated that new legislation enacted since the release of its February budget, alongside new projections on other spending and receipts, would add $101 billion more to the 2019 deficit, pushing it above $1 trillion. That figure would amount to 5.1% of the United States' gross domestic product, the nation's total economic output. It says the mid-year budget review was released quietly on Friday. Of course it was. Estimates from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office had forecast the deficit to near $1 trillion in 2019, but not pass it until 2020. It says Budget Watchdog said that deficits had doubled in recent years as a result of bipartisan spending agreements and the GOP tax cut law passed in December. Okay, so I want to repeat to you guys this quote. It says estimates from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office had forecast the deficit to near $1 trillion in 2019, but to not pass it until 2020. So these projections that literally had the deficit at below that said in 2019 it'll near $1 trillion, but it won't go over $20 trillion. They were wrong, but not in the other direction. It's not like, those damn bipartisan congressional organizations that are making these predictions, they're wrong. Yeah, they were wrong, but in the other direction from what you wanted. It's going to be over $1 trillion, and it's because of the GOP's tax cuts bill. So I really have to question, how could you claim to be both deficit and debt hawks while also simultaneously raising the deficit and debt? Not only that, but you're celebrating the bill that caused that as if it's, Jesus returning back to earth. I don't understand it, and it doesn't make any sense because it's a contradiction to hypocrisy.